I got a strange going on out here. Something just killed my dog.
Something killed your dog?
My dog went flying through the air over the tree. I don't know how it did it.
Okay.
Damn it, I'm really confused. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence, and he was dead when she hit the ground. I didn't see any cars. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence.
What are you reporting?
We got someone or something crawling around out here.
Did you see what it was?
It was standing up. I'm out here looking through the window now and I don't see anything. I don't want to go outside. Jesus Christ, you better...
Sure.
Deal!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
Hey folks, we are live. Thank you guys for joining us for Sasquatch Odyssey Live. Let me go down the chat real quick and say hello to those who have tuned in so far. Jeremy, what's up, man? I appreciate you being here. Kathy, hello. Sharon, Uncle Bones. I'm glad you guys are here. So I don't do a ton of these live shows, but typically when I do, it's something important to talk about, right? So tonight is one of those nights. We have one of those people that really needs no introduction, frankly, but there's some people who may not be familiar with Doug, but we have the incomparable Doug Hajicek on the show tonight, and he has a lot of stuff going on with this new project that he's working on. So Doug and I are going to be talking about that tonight. It is Legend Meets Science 2. So I know you guys probably have questions about that. Some of you may not even be familiar with the Legend Meets Science 1. So if you've got questions tonight, put them in the chat. I'll do my very best. It's just me and Doug tonight, so I will be monitoring everything. Tate Hieronymus, thanks for joining us, man. What's going on? Mike Barone, hey, what's going on? I'm glad that you guys are here. Hey, Gene, Mama is in the house. I appreciate you guys being here. Doug and I just got together. He just got in the studio, so we're about to bring him up here in a second. I'm going to go ahead and add him to the stream, so when he gets back on camera, there he is, the man of the hour, Doug Hajicek. What's up, man?
Hey, how you doing, Brian?
I am good, sir. I appreciate you being here tonight. I'm glad we can make this happen. Brian Corbin's in the house. I was texting back and forth with Brian. He's excited about Legend Meets Science 2. He was jumping over and giving some money to the Kickstarter, which we'll certainly talk about at some point in time tonight. But let's start here, Doug. Some people may not be familiar with Legend Meets Science 1. So let's jump right into it. Let's talk about Legend Meets Science 1. How did that project come about? What were you thinking when you started that project, and how did that ultimately come to be?
Okay, well, it's kind of a long story, but let me try to shorten it. I was up in the Arctic, came upon footprints that the trackway, was miles and miles, because in the Arctic there's no trees. It's just tundra, and so these footprints couldn't be hidden. In that you can literally see them going off into the horizon. I had already been familiar with bears. I knew they weren't black, weren't polar bears or grizzly bears. And so I came back just, whoa, life-changing. I literally got a hold of Matt Moneymaker. This is back in the 90s, and Matt was just so gracious. He just talked my ear off. Told me all the things about these things, and I was just shocked. And so we got to be friends. Next thing you know, we're talking about, well, how? And I'm like, well, how can we get this information out to the world? And so that's kind of where Legend Meets Science 1 was born, is just, one, I was just constantly shocked by all of the information that was available on these creatures, but that nobody knew, including me. So I'm like, if I don't know, and I'm a wildlife researcher, well then, how does that fit well with the public? No wonder they don't believe in it. And so it just set out pitching it, repitching it, getting turned down. You know the deal, Brian. And finally, it was John Ford at Discovery Channel, bless his heart. He looked at the one sheet that my agent gave him and he goes, yeah, that looks interesting. Let's do it. And so he called me up and he goes, yeah, Discovery wants to do it. And they want you to shoot it in film, like real film, not video. So I'm like, sure, no problem. So that's what we did. We shot it in film, lined up all of these different scientists and different disciplines, gave them a piece of evidence or a number of pieces of evidence to study, and then come up with a firm conclusion, right? So you'll see like the likes of like Jimmy Chilcutt for the first time on TV doing the fingerprint. But it was pieces like that really wowed me as an individual, knowing, that Bigfoot friction ridges on the bottom of the feet are actually angled. They don't go this way and they don't go this way like humans do, and they're kind of halfway in between humans and apes. So it was those kinds of things that we included in Legend Meets Science 1. And of course, and Jeff Meldrum wrote the big book, Legend Meets Science, based off the doc as a foundation, a skeleton. And, he could expound on everything because I only had 50 minutes to do everything. And so that's kind of a really, an amazing thing to try to take all this information, put it in within a 50-minute package, keep it very complete, and keep it entertaining. So it doesn't go too quick. So that's always the challenge. So with Legend Meets Science 2, so this is how many years later? It's like 23 years later. I've been working on it for those last 23 years, believe it or not. So that's what's cool. So I'm hoping to put all of the information in, all of it, that we currently do know, but then all of the things that I have questions about, and then taking all of the new evidence, which we have a lot of new categories of evidence, and then getting those analyzed, at multiple labs for the very, very ending for a final conclusion, including full nuclear DNA under, the guidance of universities. So we hope that people will not question the results, and that's kind of where we're at.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, obviously you answered the question about why the timing on the first one. 23 years later, you've been working on it all this time.
Yeah.
Why do you feel like now is the time to really push this forward?
Well, because there really wasn't a lot until I had a sufficient body of evidence, sufficient number of new categories of evidence. That takes time. Because when I first heard about all the different things, evidence, I was going off of 50 years of other researchers, putting it all together and then suddenly going, wow. So I was ready to do it right away then, Legend Meets Science 1. But things haven't changed that much past that first 50 years of research that people had done, like, John Green and Renee DeHinden and Peter Byrne and, all those kind of people. But over, since even Monster Quest days, I've been putting things, basically on the back burner, taking notes, looking out for more evidence. For instance, literally in the last month, we have a whole new category of evidence that came to light in the last month. And now we're vetting that evidence as quickly as we can. And that's basically on this purring noise that we thought we had the only tape of. Come to find out, all these people now are contacting us going, hey, I recorded this in 2008. I recorded this in 2014. I recorded this. So now we're trying to figure out, what does this mean? And people can say, well, it's just another unknown sound. But if we can collaborate all this, do the spectrograms, and we're figuring out these are all in the infrasound range. They overlap above 20 hertz and way below 20 hertz. So suddenly it makes it interesting because it dovetails right into a whole sound chapter that we're going to have in there with all sorts of new information. And I really hope that after people get done watching Legend Meets Science 2, they really understand things far deeper in all of these categories, including the sounds, to where they'll be able to do the math and explain to somebody who doesn't know it of why a Bigfoot scream is different than a canid, a wolf or a coyote, and why is it different than a human, and why can't a human duplicate it? So we're hoping to just bring up the education of everybody, so they can defend this damn what would you call it? It's not a hobby. I can't think of the word. There's a word for it. This genre of thing that we all do and spend so much time on trying to solve this, whether you're a researcher or just a layman that's just interested in the topic, they're still doing research, So we have got 24, really new categories of evidence that we're going to be looking at. We're going to be dealing with all sorts of new scientists. And so this documentary will really be, I think, the best for another decade, another 2 decades, 3 decades, 4 decades. It's going to be a milestone doc.
I definitely agree. I want to talk a little bit about those categories of evidence, because that's something that's really just bugged me to no end over the last couple of years. Is it feels like I've famously said many times, we're on the 5-yard line, and I've heard other people now. I tune into other shows and I hear people talking about the 5-yard line, and I'm like, it's clearly across the board. Everybody sort of feels that way.
Yeah.
Talking about all these new categories of evidence. Let's talk about some of the things let's break those down a little bit, if you don't mind, and talk about some of those, because for people that may be listening, they don't really understand what's really going on. They look at the Patterson-Gimlin film, they look at the Freeman footage, and they think, well, that's basically it. And you throw in maybe some tomfoolery here and there from people like, faking things or whatnot. But what is out there in the zeitgeist for you guys to take a look at some of those categories?
Well, the main thing I want to get across, Brian, is we're going to cover every category. Categories people hadn't even thought of. So this independence gives me the chance to say, I don't need to stick to a 50-minute format. I don't need to stick to an hour, 2 hours, 3. If it needs to go to 4, no problem. We're gonna get the information out, everything. I've got to be a little bit careful of specifics, because already I've got 2 instances of things people had no idea about, didn't know anything, and suddenly now they're contacting people that are going to be in the dock trying to do an end run. And, and that's kind of, I literally was up till 3 a.m. on a very significant thing where another production company is trying to end run me on something, and willing, and they've got the money to do it. So that's where I get a little gun shy this close to the end. But let's see. Let's just talk about one category. So we have the anatomical breakdown of a Bigfoot, right? And you can think, well, how many things, excuse me, how many things can you write down concerning the anatomy of a Bigfoot, Brian? The average person would come up with maybe a couple of things. I'm going to cover 20, 30 things, and that are absolute, meaning there's so much evidence to back up this. Thousands of sightings. For instance, we'll cover the IM index as an example, which has been touched on very briefly in certain videos, but we're going to really go into length. We're going to be able to give you the exact percentage of people in the world that fit this IM index of the intermembral index, with the long arms, shorter legs, longer torso. There's only 1 in 5,000 people that might be able to squeak into that category. But just on the anatomical areas alone, people are going to walk away so educated, where they're going to be able to really get into some great discussions with skeptics. because they're going to have something they're going to be armed with. And it's not just going to be, it's not me talking. This is going to be scientists, people that are really good in their field of work. And maybe they won't even believe necessarily in the existence of the creature, but they're going to be cornered into saying, yes, this joint relationship to this joint relationship does not fit human. Do you follow me? They don't have to admit Bigfoot's real, but they can back up everything that we're going to have in here will be backed up by science. And if we do infer anything, something new or things to think about, we will make sure that people know this is an inference. This is not fact yet, but this is something, researchers need to be looking at. For instance, we were talking about in the past how Bigfoots may favor blue, the color blue. It's funny. I just got a call from a researcher who said they put out a whole collection of rocks and for gifting. They've been gifting for quite a while. And the only 2 rocks that ever get moved are the blue ones. And so that's an inference. It's untested. That can never, that will be, things like that will be in the dock to give researchers more, weapons to things to try. But there'll be so many things that will be proven and will be scientific and solid that those other things are just bonus, food for thought,
That color blue thing was something that I just had a conversation with Jeff Harding the other day, and we were talking about some of the research he did. Yep. And Jeff was talking about putting out blue balls versus other types of colors of things that he would put out. And it seemed like the blue, whatever it was, toys or whatever the case may be, got moved more often and played with more often than other colors, which I thought was very interesting. We do have a question from Robert here. How hopeful are you that EDNA might produce undeniable evidence that Sasquatch exists? I think that's a good question. The DNA thing is always something that comes up. I know Melba Ketchum's doing some new study, and there's been some hoo-ha in the Bigfoot community about the DNA studies and stuff like that. But what specifically about EDNA? Can you talk a little bit about that, Doug? And how?
Well, yeah, sure. One, we're not going to have to do any environmental DNA. I'm sitting on a pile of enough things that will have nuclear DNA. I don't need to go into the environment and do that. We may do some eDNA if the opportunity comes up. But the problem with the eDNA, I'm not going to have to pay for one DNA test. I've got to pay for all of these creatures that are in lake water, or all of, you know what I mean? It becomes a very, very hit and miss. It's something for a huge budget. If I had $80,000 just to spend on one test, then eDNA is awesome, and it's going to the cost is going to come down. At some point, we're all going to have a DNA machine in our homes, like we have a printer, right? Like tons of people are now getting 3D printers in their home because they're $100. Well, at one point they were $30,000. Now they're $100. You can get a nice 3D printer for $100. The DNA machines are coming down, like exponentially. And eventually you'll be able to buy one on Amazon for $100. And you'll be able to test DNA all day long. That's coming. That information will also be in Legend Meets Science, so people understand. But we're not going to need to do eDNA in this, because we have so many other samples. We don't need to go to that kind of desperate mode. And I think the eDNA is great. It's, for instance, if you get a fresh footprint and now you can take the soil that was attached to that it touched the skin, great. But think of the sifting that has to be done to find skin cells when there's skin cells of millions of animals in that same soil sample, insects and worms and bacteria. Everything's got a DNA signature. So it becomes very, very expensive.
One of the other things that you and I have talked about before, Doug, and Jeff and I touched on this during our conversation,
Mhm.
was some of the things that he had collected that looked like sebum or the excretion from
Oh,
these
yeah.
bears.
Yep.
Is that something else you guys are into during the
Yes. Yep. And here's where that's really good. I'm sorry, I've been on the phone all day today. By the end of the day, I'm about shot. Okay, so this is what I would call 3D evidence because we have the latent details. So if something pushes its face against the glass, it's going to leave the face print that can be lifted, studied, sweat pores. We can do 3D, reconstruction of the face. We can then do gas chromatograph analysis of the actual chemical compound, because here's the beauty. All of the apes have been done, including humans, on what's in the sebum. There's many waxes, cholesterol types, triglycerides. There's all these different chemicals and then different amounts. That stuff's already been fingerprinted for every ape species. So now we get the Sasquatch, and that's going to have its own fingerprint. But the beautiful thing is with this sebum, it's the easiest evidence anybody can collect. And people are like, well, how are you going to collect that easy? You put a blue piece of glossy plexiglass near your research area. When that's seen, they're going to want to touch it, and they're going to leave you nice fingerprints. And then you just collect them with a Q-tip and swap or photograph it. Obviously, you can lift the print. You can swab it for DNA. It's going to have skin cells in it. So now you've got everything. Get the whole enchilada, and it can be redone over and over and over and over and over again by every scientist. Can spend $20 and go out to an area that they're told to go out to, or that they feel is a good area, and leave a piece of plexiglass out there and come back and collect it. It's not real expensive, and it's very repeatable because Bigfoot seem to be very tactile. They like to touch glossy surfaces. How many people in the audience listening have found fingerprints on their glass on their truck, or their home, because they like to touch things? It's one of their weaknesses. They want to feel everything. So there you go.
Yeah, I definitely want to get into some more of just research tips in general. But we do have a question from Tate Hieronymus I want to throw up here. It's something we've talked about on the show. I've actually done a live show in the past about drones. Will Doug try my drone pheromone? Sorry.
Pheromone idea, yeah.
Yeah, pheromone idea to lure in Bigfoot.
That's been tried, obviously. But these are things that need to be tried thousands of times, not just once. So the chance of that working in one area is a jillion to one. And I don't want this show to be about trying things and then thinking they're going to get results. We're going to do things in Legend Meets Science that we actually feel will get results. I'm not so sure that a drone dragging pheromone around, because the tree cover in the U.S. is so thick. I'd have to go way up to the Arctic on the tree line during caribou calving season. Then something like that might work. But the bottom line is, Tate, we don't know if we even have Bigfoot pheromone. The first pheromone was developed by me and Greg Bambanek. Then it was based on an idea that I had to basically take female vaginal enzymes and gorilla enzymes and mix them together and combine, just use some common sense just to try it. It was just something I wanted to try. But it's kind of gotten into those pheromone chips have now been used by a lot of researchers. But any other pheromone is just guessing. We're just guessing. What is it? So then you've got a double guess. So not only you have a thick tree cover, you're going to either be dragging a chip or spraying, and it's just to me logistically a nightmare. You're better off attracting them in one area, and certainly you can use pheromones for that, but we don't really know if they work. But the first time we used them, Brian, I'm looking at a photo above me of the skookum cast, a big giant photo. That was gotten the first time, the first night those pheromone chips were used. And the story is I was going to go on the skookum expedition, but I couldn't go because my son was getting married. And so I called Greg and I say, hey, Greg, you want to go in my place? And by the way, he's into scents his whole life. And he's a brilliant man. And I said, Greg Bamenek, would you be able to create human and half gorilla sex pheromones? Literally, Brian, he goes, yeah, I might have those ingredients in my basement. How many people could you call that would say that to you? But I called the right guy, and he developed them. And he used a scent-absorbing plastic that was originally, I think, used for coyote repellents. And that's how the orange plastic, and that's how all that went down. But it was just basically an idea I had. This goes back, I don't know, somewhere in the 90s. But do they work? I don't know. Not sure.
Well, let's stay on that line of thinking for a little bit about some, that's the other thing that's sort of been sticking in my craw recently is it seems like we're really getting we're not getting a whole lot of new stuff, right? As far as research is concerned.
Yep.
So I know people are thinking outside the box out there. During the conversation with Jeff that I had, he did some pretty out of the box things. And I know you guys work together on coming up with some of those things. If you're giving people advice that really want to go out and help collect some evidence that may move the ball down the field a little bit, or maybe shows like this one coming up, LMS2, or just other studies in general, what are some of the things that you've come up with over the years or that you would suggest to people that want to go out? I think we're past the point of screaming in the woods and banging on the trees is my point here. How can we think more outside the box? And from your perspective, looking at this from a very scientific approach, how can people go out and collect some evidence that would actually help move the ball down the field?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually quite simple to get evidence. For instance, this week we collected another 20 hairs. That's in 1 week's worth of work. And we know they're Sasquatch hairs by vetting them, but they're already in a spot that couldn't be anything else, because we're collecting them from, almost 8 feet, 9 feet in the air on a power line pole. And that's, so let me go through kind of a list of things people can do, they can afford. One, if you have an area, there's Bigfoots, look for the power line cuts. Look for the power line poles. If they're wooden, if you're lucky enough to have wooden poles, we have come to realize that they use these things for back scratchers. And look for hair at about 8 feet up. So that's one thing that can be done. And you can collect hairs that way on a pretty regular basis. And I know that sounds crazy, but it's been working for me. 2, get a motorcycle dash cam system, because the cameras are tiny, they're waterproof, they're on a small little almost fiber optic cords. They come with 2 cameras, right? So you're not going to miss action. They're cheap. It's $135 for a whole unit. It's got a monitor. It records automatically when it's powered up. It records audio and video, which is cool. It even records the GPS coordinates, which is cool. But the thing is, you can get very creative with these microscopic cameras. You can hide them completely. Picture a camera looking up, mounted down below a pop can, below the hole in a pop can, but it's down a ½ inch. So all you see is black. You see the opening to where you drink out of, but there's nothing sticking up. It's recessed. You can do that with these cameras. So you do you have your campsite, and literally, I think probably 50% of the reports I get are people that have activity in their camp when they're camping. They're not out chasing Bigfoots. They're not out doing anything. If anything, if they're researchers, they're just doing 1 or 2 wood knocks. That's it. But these things are coming to them because they're curious. They're sneaking into their camp. Well, the beautiful thing is, if you're a light sleeper, you hear them. The cameras are off. Everything's off. You bring a black tarp. You have a black tarp in your tent. You throw it over your head, power up the monitor, and now you can see what's going on. But you can have those cans, tipped over. You can have actually some of the liquid that's been spilled, a beer. You can hide these in potato chip bags. You can bury them and just have literally that 3.6 millimeter lens aiming straight up. You can be 5 feet from your tent, 10 feet from each side on the tent with like a blue sea sky, a motorcycle cam. They come with a USB adapter. So you can power it with one of these cheap cell phone chargers, which is you can get it as cheap as $9. The power, think about it. Power supply for the whole night for $9. And it doesn't weigh more than a few ounces. And these cameras are tiny, they're waterproof. You can slit a little hole in a tent, a little tiny hole. I always recommend people buy cheap tents. Because if you're one of those people buying a $500 or $1,000 tent, you're wasting your money. Get the cheapest tent you can get. Because even the most expensive tents mold. They get black mold on them. They get wet. They get nasty. They get dirty. But you can just toss them away. Go for the $60 tent, right? Use them 3 times and toss them or whatever. But then you can put slits. You can cut them, little holes at the very bottom, or very low, and get those cameras strung out so they go. And then you can bury the cable. You can get very creative for $135. They used to be $90 for a kit. So now it's gone up with inflation, $135, I guess. But blue sea sky, one word, unlike Amazon sells them. And they do have the USB adapter they include. That's the only one I've been using. But here's another thing. You can wear the same cameras out in the woods when you go walking. It's better than a GoPro because it's instant on. Plug it into your power supply and forget about it. It's recording and buffering because you don't need the footage of your damn walk unless it's recorded something. If you see something, if you hear something, then you're going to want the footage saved. You hit a button, it saves everything. But otherwise, it just automatically buffers over for 12 hours. It's buffering. It's dummy proof. Once again, if I had a nickel for every guy who said, oh man, I forgot to turn the camera on. I forgot to turn the recorder on. Well, with this, you don't have to remember anything. Just make sure it's powered on, it's recording. And out of 2 cameras, you can have one aimed, behind you, aim forward. And then on your way home, you can put it on the dashboard. So you've got a dash cam too. So you're getting all this use out of one system, and then you can use it as a long-term outdoor trail cam because now you can hide it. You don't have to have this ugly big box slapped on the side of of a tree. You want it so you don't see anything. So you can just send your best bud and say, "Bud, where's my camera here? It's somewhere on one of these." You want them to come back going, "I can't find it." That's what you want. When you can say that, then you've done good.
Here's one of the questions that's come up for me recently that I've started asking people, Doug, is what is the motivation behind going out into the woods? I've asked several researchers who have been on recently, and this sort of leads into a question that this is actually my mom. Hi, Mom. Do you ever think about the negative consequences for Bigfoot once man gets closer? We all know humans can be very cruel, and it is more of a bigger question of, say we do prove this species, what happens then? What about the big conservation word that always comes up? Where are you on that? And how do you see science and proving this thing as a species playing out over the long term and maybe going into conservation as well?
Right. For some reason, Your question went just poosh right over the top of my head. I was reading something in the comments, and it was a long comment, and I want to answer the Bigfoot atheist inquiry. So go ahead and ask your question, then I'm going to answer his question.
Yes, we will get to the
Sorry.
Bigfoot atheist in a moment. So basically, in a
Sorry.
nutshell, the question was, for me, it was sort of two parts. What is your
Okay.
motivation, say with LMS2, and just in general? Is it to prove the species, obviously? And then if that happens, where do you see that going with conservation and further down the road, say 10 years after this thing is proven as a species?
I don't think it'll do anything to the I don't think it'll help the environment at all. I don't think they'll do anything. Here's why. I'm very cynical. I'll just tell you a quick funny story, but this is the way it really works. I was trying to buy some industrial property, a building, and I needed to expand the parking lot, and there was a drainage ditch in front of the property, and I wanted to put another driveway in over the drainage ditch. And I had to go speak in front of the watershed committee. And I offered to buy an acre of land out in the forest to preserve some forest land for me to put a 10-foot wide. I wasn't even blocking the water flow, just a 10-foot wide driveway over the top of this they called wetlands, which was just a ditch, a man-made ditch. And of course, I got turned down. Fought it for a year and got turned down. But then, not even a year later, they wiped out a giant wetlands that covered maybe 500 acres. They wiped it out completely for a building, for houses. So this is the way it really works. I wasn't forking over, all this money to them. And so the builder obviously, there's vacations to Hawaii and God knows to these environmental committees. Well, it works that way in every state. It's, you can tear down as much swampland and as much forest as you want, as long as you got the money, So will it help preserve anything? Maybe it could enhance a national park, or maybe it's possible. It's always the hope that one more national park would get opened, because national parks are the only thing that are truly safe, So with that in mind, my goal is just to raise the bar. This, even if we get really good DNA and it gets confirmed by two separate sources, a scientific paper gets written and it gets published in a proper scientific journal, that's still, that's just the start of raising the bar. That might allow another researcher to use that scientific paper to get a grant for a legitimate academic organization to get a grant, for instance, from the government. So it all helps, but it's not going to be an end all. I think even if a body was found and it was only one body, same thing would happen. Scientific paper would be published on it. It would raise the bar tremendously, but would it finish, the whole topic? Would suddenly they be just scrambling to set forests aside? No, that's going to happen. Because most of the land is owned by somebody. Anyhow, it's either owned by the Bureau of Land Management. Some of their land might get converted into a sanctuary, possibly. But generally, I'm just cynical about, the population of the U.S. is growing. They need land, and they need housing developments. And so, but I do know this. We have more wildlife now in the U.S. than probably at any point. And that is exciting. I see yesterday, I was out riding one of my electric bikes, came across so many turkeys I feared for my life. Literally to the point where, you could get killed by these things if there's enough of them attacking you. And so that's what's really interesting. Because when I was a kid, I can tell everybody this. When I was a kid, we never saw deer. We didn't see any raptors. Never saw fox. Never saw coyotes. If there was a deer sighting, it would make the paper. And now they're everywhere. And so because we've created more edges, and I really believe the edges do help wildlife survive. And that's what we're talking about. Power line cuts, that's just another edge. The edge of an agriculture field is where you're going to have a Bigfoot sighting. It's going to be that edge of the apple orchard. It's going to be at the edge of your campsite, the campgrounds. So that's kind of where it's at. But I wanted to get to that question because it's a good question.
Yeah,
How do I know?
Yeah, I'm gonna put it up here and I'll read it to you.
So I don't know 100%, but I do know 99. One, there's been 3 sightings in that power line cut by different people that don't even know each other. So that's kind of a good thing. So we know there's some activity of an unknown animal in that area. Then, when I get the hairs, I cannot find any other hair in the world that matches it. So it becomes unknown. Naturally worn end, no medulla, or very little, very fragmented medulla. So you have the naturally worn end, you have that, and you have human scaling. So you have all 3 of those things. And you have a slightly smaller diameter, and you have a certain type of a curve to the hair. There's a certain curve to it, certain length. There's so many properties that can be where a hair can go through a vetting process. If you think about human scaling, now that cannot be faked. So you can be as skeptical as you want, but no one's going to fake hair scaling. Well, then if you take the amount of scales that may be around the outside diameter is different than a human, or the hair matches baby hair from a diameter standpoint, but what is baby hair doing 8 foot up in a power line cut? And if it's baby hair, then how is it 8 inches long? See, the two contradict each other. You can't have baby hair that's 8 inches long. And how did it get a naturally worn end? So we have babies living out in the forest. You follow, and I can keep going. So that's where you come to the inferred that this is a Bigfoot hair. And there's other tests that I do. Some of them I'm not talking about yet because we're going to reveal them in Legend Meets Science. And apparently I got about 90 people wanting to end run me on everything. But generally you start lowering the chances and the odds that this is some other animal, or it's a human, or it's a hoax. When you have all of those things going for you, you tend to really feel confident you're dealing with an unknown primate here.
And I think that's a very fair question because that comes up often for me.
Absolutely, it is. Absolutely.
And even with the vocalizations and other things, obviously we've got a database. There's tons of databases out there with known animals that you can compare things to.
Right.
And if you do that and there's no specimen that comes out to say, okay, this matches this, then you're just left with more real questions than answers. But it leads you down the path. It's sort of that collective thing of, if this isn't a known species, then what is it, right? So it sort of narrows it down to what
it might be more interesting to figure out what animal it is if it's not a Bigfoot, because God knows what red animal that's got auburn orangutan colored hair. It's running around the Northwoods of Minnesota. That's got 8-inch long hair. I mean, if this is some type of a new species of bear, I'm all for it. But I don't think it is, just because of the consistency that we find it. The naturally worn end alone, the morphology of that, meaning it's never been cut. Because once you cut a hair, that hair can grow to a foot long and you can still see that cut end. That's the beauty of that. It's a permanent thing when you cut your hair. So, we're dealing with a lot of wild men in the woods or wild people in the wood zone. That's pretty interesting to me. If we've got, naked wild men running around the woods and they're just humans, I think that's fascinating. I'd be happy to spend the rest of my life, researching that phenomena.
I love it. Jeremiah from Bigfoot Society says, will robot baby Bigfoot be powered by AI or human handler? In all seriousness, super pumped about the doc. Everybody go back it. I've actually put the link to the Kickstarter for this documentary, which we'll certainly talk about before we close out. It's in the chat, so you guys can click right there and go over right now while you're watching if you want to support this documentary. Let's talk a little bit about that, Doug. That's something that's become very popular recently. Small Town Monsters, Seth Breedlove, those guys have done a really good job of funding a lot of what they're doing. So talk a little bit about the Kickstarter program. Did you wrestle with how to fund this thing? Was Kickstarter always the way to go for you? Can you talk a little bit about that? And certainly we'll press people to go over there and give a couple of bucks and help support the project.
Yeah. Well, I've never done one. I've always been supported by networks, right? And the networks would have a much bigger budget than I would ever raise in Kickstarter. I mean, it would be astronomically bigger, but the trade-off is you've got to stick to that 50-minute, 45-minute, timeline. So I did at first try to get a limited series through a number of networks. Didn't seem to be any interest, but it takes time to do this. Then, of course, COVID hit. And I went back to the networks, and it just, time goes so quick. But so this Kickstarter may fail, may end up in the graveyard of Kickstarters, but then so does a lot of people's on their first attempt. But so if we do fail, there's certainly a bigger chance Legend Meets Science will never get ever produced at that point. A lot can happen. But we'll certainly try another avenue if this doesn't work, if we can. But I'm really hoping it just succeeds, because really, if enough people get together and just donate even $10, they're going to get something for their money. And we have some really good, I think they're good reward programs that go all the way up to 10,000. That one person even took us up on the 10,000. It's, that amazes me. But there's some people out there that this is important to, and they have money. They're not hurting for money. And I think we're actually asking a very small amount, because me and Scott are going to still have to finance it. Huge part of this out of our own savings. If people think 80,000 is going to cover this whole doc, not a chance. It won't even, I doubt it would even cover some of the forensic. It'll cover some of them. It'll be a great start. And if we can get the 80, we'll finish it, even, whatever, we'll kick our own money into it. So we'll get it done. But we have, everybody's limited on what they can do. So that's the beauty of a Kickstarter, is that we have the freedom then to make it as long as we need to, driven by content, not by a time clock. And I know it'll be the best Bigfoot doc ever produced. I'm very confident. It sounds terrible saying that, but I know it will be. I just know it will be. I would love to see somebody do a better one, but I'm much more experienced now, believe it or not, than I was when I did Legend Meets Science 1. Yeah, I'd done quite a bit of TV, but only for 12, 14 years at that point. But then I've got that whole Monster Quest series behind me. So I know how to put together, a show. So I guarantee it'll be entertaining. But we're going to have this amazing content in the doc. So, and we couldn't do it without guys like you, Brian, supporting this, getting the word out, because it is, for sure, it's a numbers game,
Well, I did the math before I came on, and no, I don't want to pressure the audience, but everybody who will see this on my YouTube channel and everybody who will listen in 1 week on the podcast, if everybody gave $1, we would fund this thing in 1 week. That's the honest truth. So yeah, I'm putting the gauntlet down for everybody out there. $1 is great. $5 is better. 10 is wonderful. If you can do 100, that's even that much better. And there are tons of rewards on there for basically every tier. So I'm gonna do my donation. I'm gonna do my part. So I'm asking everybody who's listening to just do what you can. I know times are tough. I know the economy is not the greatest.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing too, Brian. we are living in a little bit of tough times. I just went to Wendy's to get a meal for 2 people. It was like $30. I'm like, that's fast food. That's 2 burgers and a chili and a fry and one pop. But I'm just like, how is the middle class affording, what's going on? So these donations, I know they're more heartfelt now because nobody has the disposable income they did a few years ago.
Absolutely. If you can do without that one Starbucks coffee this week, kick it into the Kickstarter for Legend Meet Science 2. There's a couple of other questions that seem to be coming up, so I want to be respectful of your time. I know you've been talking a lot, so we're going to get you out of here in a moment, Doug. But I want to
no
questions. Doug, do you fall into the wood ape theory or undecided on all the super strange personal encounter stories out there? And there was another one from Jeremy that I kind of know the answer to, but it kind of goes along the same lines. What are your beliefs around them being multi-dimensional beings, possibly?
Nothing would surprise me, but they do leave behind evidence. So I have to just go on that. I know quite a large number of researchers that don't try to gather evidence because they feel they're metaphysical or they're, spiritual or whatever. They don't feel a need to. They really feel like they know them and, or whatever. And I totally respect that. Totally. But on the same token, I really believe we're on this planet to learn. We're not on this planet to accept. We're on this planet to constantly learn. There could be no other reason for us to be here other than to learn. And so I want to learn. And so Legend Meet Science is all about learning and teaching people. So I'm not in any camp because I'm open-minded. I had one weird experience that I can't explain too, where I felt like it was me and Blaine and 2 other people. We were out at the campfire. Yeah, it was Blaine's girlfriend and Yvette, and we're at the campfire, and we hear what sounds like an elephant running towards us, charging us. We hear it going through the grass, all the sound effects you can make. The ground is shaking. We ran out of fear because it was that intense, but we didn't see anything. We never saw anything. So that puts you in, it keeps you open-minded, But that doesn't even mean that was a Bigfoot experience. I mean, maybe there was an earthquake. Maybe I could give a million excuses, as to what that could have been. But, I'm open-minded, 100% open-minded, humble.
I'm right there with you. I hear so many interesting stories that seem to be what people call woo, but they are their experiences, right? And I just
don't ignore it. Yeah.
Right. You can't ignore it. I think there's a little bit of something to be gleaned from everybody's experience. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about something I haven't had you on the show and talked about, is another project that you've got going on in amongst all of the other stuff with LMS2 is the Untold Radio Network. For people who've listened to my audience, they've heard the advertisements on there. They've heard me talking about the fantastic shows. Can you talk a little bit about what the catalyst for that was and how that came to be?
Oh, man, I don't even know. It kind of happened organically in a lot of ways. It all started with Bigfoot. I was at a Bigfoot conference and was asked whether I wanted to co-host a podcast. So I did that. And learned a little bit about the business, and wanted to grow. Well, the only way everybody can only do so much. I can only podcast so much as you can. The idea behind the Untold Radio Network was just to get similar shows to all kind of team up as a consortium and put our efforts in a little bit of one basket and team up and be able to get more done as a team and to get information out where people can subscribe to one channel, the Untold Radio Network, and get a lot of information on their favorite topics, Bigfoot being one of them, paranormal. Brian, you're part of the Untold Radio Network with Weird Encounters, and you're one of the reasons, Brian. You inspire me. So very inspired actually by what you do. So.
Well, that was very nice. I'll pay you later, Doug. I didn't know you were going to say nice things like that about me.
Yeah, no, you inspired me. No, it's true. Very true. But I really do think that podcasts are a great way to get information out because you can listen when you're driving. You can listen anytime you want, whether you're driving cross country or if you like to sit down and watch it on YouTube, you can do that. So really, it's such a diverse medium, and you don't have to usually put up with a ton of commercials. Try to watch modern day cable now. It's 3 minutes of content and 10 minutes of commercials. So although we have to have a little bit of commercials, it's not too bad. It's pretty commercial free for the most part. So it's a great medium. I believe in the medium.
I definitely agree. Violet just thank you for giving up your coffee this week, Violet. We appreciate that. Doug appreciates that. So before we get out of here, Doug, let's talk a little bit about, I guess, the bigger picture for LMS2. We've talked a little bit about what the reason behind it was, but at the end of the day, what is it that you really want people to take away from LMS1 and LMS2 when it becomes a thing and gets out there in the zeitgeist? What do you really want to be the final word and people to take away from this?
Well, I want to take away a lot of the ignorance and the myths that are floating around for the people that are researching and are interested in it. I want to also arm them with more hardcore data so they can say to their uncle who might be a complete skeptic and thinking that you're a complete idiot because you're interested in Bigfoot, that you can hand them the DVD and say, here, go watch this, and then come back, with the jaw dropped. God, I didn't know there was this and this, all these things. And eventually it piles up. But the main thing I really want to do is just raise the bar for everybody, including the academic world. We need more academics involved. Amy Boo has really cracked open with a really unexpected system. I was on a meeting last night in ZooBook, and it's just so cool because there's all these academics in there, and they're many of them are anonymous. They don't want to be teased at their college or wherever they're, if they're a professor or their job. But there's interest in academia. But this is a really cool way they can secretly buy Legend Meets Science 2 or pay for a streaming service and watch it and get educated, and all these new things and stay up to date. If this is successful, if we will continue to do other projects with this system. I'm new to it, not used to it, but it's a system you have to actually get good at, I guess, because it is hard to convince people to turn over hard-earned money. It's not easy, and I've never felt guiltier in my life asking, regular folk to dig deep into their pocket and donate to this cause. It actually leaves me with a twinge of guilt versus, a big rich network that's taking in, $50,000 per commercial that they're getting in from a car company. You know what I mean? To them, it's no big deal, but to the average person, can be painful, So we really do appreciate it. And I do feel guilty. So I'm going to make sure to work really hard so I don't feel guilty in the end. So in the end, I'm given, the guilt has been taken away and I feel like I really did good. So that's my goal. I don't want to leave the end of this when it's all over. The show has been produced. Everybody's gotten their rewards. I want to make sure that guilt in me right now is gone.
And that is a tough thing for any content creator, I think, who's doing anything in any medium. I go through that with the show. It is my full-time job. So unfortunately, commercials and even, the the money that people put into subscriptions and things to get extra content, it's one of those necessary evils. And I have that battle within myself, as I really want to do the best job that I possibly can to make sure that people feel like they've gotten their money's worth. And I think that's one of the things, at least I love about Kickstarter, is it allows you to have skin in the game. You get to buy into the project. And when that comes out and you get to see that on the big screen, on your television, whatever you watch it on, you know you were a part of that. Literally,
every contributor will get their name in the credits. Every last one, no matter how small of a donation.
Absolutely. And I think that really does say a lot about you and the project. And frankly, anybody who does it like this is you're doing it the right way. I know how hard you work. I know you outside of these shows. We don't just get to see each other on here. I know the hours that you put in. We've been texting back and forth at hours that we should probably both been asleep, but you're up and your brain's moving and you're always constantly working. So that's one of the things I admire most about you. And I know at the end of the day, you will not let these people down.
No, I won't. I was going to say too, because they're really, people say, well, what does executive producer means? Those are the people that generally finance a project. Everybody who donates becomes an executive producer.
And it can't happen without you folks. So, like I said, you're going to find, if you're listening to this on the podcast side and the audio podcast, look in the show notes. It's going to be right there, front and center. Click on that. Go over there. Check it out. We've ticked up a little bit. We started at $22,699, and we're now at $22,704 because we got that $5 instead of coffee from Violet this week. So everybody can do their part. I appreciate everybody taking time to listen and making sure that we're not missing out on any questions. Any final words from you, Doug?
Well, I do want people to know this is not just an entertainment doc. They're funding science to get done that needs doing so bad. The other thing I want to say that on the entertainment side, we have procured already, contracts have been signed on literally the best production equipment money can buy, all cinematic stuff. So, this visually will be an amazing, just like I did number 1 in 35 millimeter film. This one will have equal amount of effort in, look up what a Red Dragon camera costs. We've got 4 of them for Legend Meet Science. We have track systems. We have every kind of jib you can imagine, robotic jibs. So every scene in this thing is going to be gorgeous. And I think that will actually help the impact of the information we're getting out. So if we have a conclusion on DNA and it's amazingly filmed, I think it has a little more impact than a shaky cam going, if you know what I mean. So I think that this will be your future Bible that you're funding for the Bigfoot.
I can't wait. Everybody go check it out in the show notes. It's in the chat. I will have it up on YouTube as well. And when this gets posted, so it'll be everywhere. If you just want to go straight to Kickstarter, go over there. All you got to do is put in Legend Meet Science, Kickstarter. It'll pull right up. Give whatever you can and become part of history is what I really think is going to happen. You're going to be a part of history, and not everybody can say that. Doug Hajicek, you are a history maker, man. I really appreciate you taking your time and coming on and talking about it. And
thanks, Brian. I appreciate everything you do, and I'm one of your biggest fans on Sasquatch Odyssey. So, you know what? You have no idea how much I've learned listening to your show. There's no end to what you can learn from listening to witnesses. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. So anyhow, thank you for everybody that showed up to listen to this, and I'll talk to you later, Brian.
All right, I'm going to play this awesome outro. You guys have a great night, and we will see you guys next time.
They say